So, my name is Jean-Michel Filippi, as you heard from Blaise. Officially, I'm a linguist, and a few years ago, I betrayed linguistics to switch to history and to prepare for publication Michael Vickery's unpublished manuscript about the history of Angkor. I will talk a bit more precisely about these events at the end of this presentation. What I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a few hints about the traditional version of Cambodian history from the French scholars who wrote about it first, like Georges Sedès, for instance, and I will try to show how different Michael Vickery's approach was and the interest. Well, inside the history of Angkor with Michael Vickery, I would say that Michael Vickery was, before everything, an iconoclast. You can find in Michael Vickery's, I would say, articles, the idea of reconstructing, deconstructing the ancient. Of course, Michael Vickery's work is something totally new. I'm going to give you a first example, before everything, the way Michael Vickery understood and wrote about pre-Angkor Cambodia. For those who are not familiar with the topic, well, we generally divide Cambodian history into three periods. The first capital of Cambodia were there from the 1st to the 6th century, the Funan Kingdom. Then afterwards, 7th century, the Chenla Kingdom, right here near the Big Lake, with a capital which was Sambo Precook. And after that, all the capitals from the 8th, the end of 8th to 15th century were in Angkor regions. In 1434, the captain came back to the four heads, Chatomuk, Phnom Penh, Long Vec, Udong, and the capital are still here right now. Well, what is interesting to notice is that from the 1st to the 6th century, there was a state, Funan. There is a big literature about that, and generally the size of Funan is still subject to controversy. But the fact is that, it was a coastal state which developed through trade in the Siam Gulf, right here. Here may be a better way to see that. You have a Champa here, Devaraja, Mon Kingdom, and Funan is right here. An interesting thing is that, well, for instance, if you want to visit the place, Phnom Da Temple is certainly one of the most important places, as the statues you can see in the National Museum, the 8 arms, Vishnu, and all his avatars were found there in the caves of a mountain on which the temple stands. Well, according to Chinese records, the last mention of Funan is around 630. Funan, there are two Chinese characters, Fu and Nan, like the South in Mandarin, which was only pronounced at that time, Nan. According to Sedès and a few others, it is supposed to come from Khmer Nam Vnum mountain. Vickery, and I totally agree with that, does not really believe in that. And soon, as the Chinese stopped talking and writing about Funan, they adopted a new name, to talk about a new entity, a new state, Chenla. The first mention was in 616. So, from that time till, I would say, in some texts, 19th century, they talked about Chenla and Chempuchai as well. What happened? Chenla, which was inside the border of what is now Cambodia. Interestingly enough, according to Chinese sources, Chenla was a territory under the control of Funan, which rebelled and defeated Funan, established a new capital at Isanapura. This is according to the Chinese sources. Let's be clear. Isanapura, you can visit it. It's Sambo Precook. Not very far from Kompotok, just halfway between Siem Reap and Phnom Penh. What is interesting is that from these Chinese sources, which are, I would say, according to Vickery, subject to caution, historians, and especially the first historian, developed a very imaginative story about the kingdom of Chenla. So now we are back to Vickery. There was a war, a rebellion of Chenla, a state vassal to Funan, and, well, a successful rebellion because, according to Chinese sources, Chenla conquered Funan. Well, Vickery doesn't agree at all with that. This is the history which was repeated and very often, unfortunately, taught here in Cambodia right now. According to Vickery, this Chenla rebellion against Funan was absolutely not confirmed by local sources, which inscription. We'll see that Vickery really used inscription most of the time. And Funan and Chenla were two different states. Chenla, an agrarian economy on the one side, and Funan on the other side, a state which, well, a monetary economy, and of course with his sea trade, it was a trading kingdom. Funan didn't stop existing because of, I would say, Chenla conquest, but just because, as Vickery shows very well, there was a modification of the axis of maritime communication and therefore of a subsequent commercial relation. I would say that the Siam Gulf was not needed anymore. The trade in Siam Gulf was not needed anymore from the 6th century, and so Funan faced a decline. There was obviously no war and no Chenla's victory. But this is mainly, I would say, in his book, Society, Economics and Politics in Pre-Angkor Cambodia, which is certainly a classics about Pre-Angkor Cambodia. It's very interesting, although Michael Vickery doesn't talk about arts. Michael Vickery is a bit silent about arts and religion. He uses it from time to time. But if we consider, for instance, the famous Harihara, which is a combination of Vishnu and Shiva. There are a few Harihara in India, you've got a few Harihara in Champa as well. But the biggest number of Harihara was precisely produced here in Cambodia in the 7th century. Wasn't it a way to combine the south, that was, I would say, Vishnu, which was a dominant god in Funan, with the north, where Shiva was a dominant god? It means a combination which implies a kind of peaceful union and certainly not a war. This is an hypothesis. It's not only my hypothesis, it was Paul Levy's one and so on. But it's an interesting thing. And especially this precisely during the 7th century, but the biggest number of Harihara were found in that part of Cambodia. Generally speaking, you know, when we have a look at a statue and things like that, it's very interesting first to say where is the statue from on the one side, and then how many statues do you have? And really the record of Harihara was beaten in that area in the 7th century. When we talk about Angkor, and we are going to come into Angkor because this book is mainly about Angkor history, there is a standard view about Angkor. In order to present this standard view, I would use Maurice Fievé, the history of Angkor as a fairy tale. Maurice Fievé was from a French family which emigrated to America and which still has strong, I would say, links with France. Maurice Fievé was offered in the late 30s some money from an aunt who was still in France in order to study in the École des Beaux-Arts, that prestigious fine art school. And so, he went there. Unfortunately, after 2 years, he was stopped by the war. And what happened after that is that he joined the resistance during the Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, he completed his training in the École des Beaux-Arts, graduated, met his wife, who was fascinated just like him by photographs and by photography and painting, and they decided to leave to Africa in 1947. In the 60s, Maurice Fievé signed a contract with National Geographic and was the main illustrator of Robert Moore's article, Angkor, Jewel of the Jungle. Jewel of the Jungle, which presented, I would say, the main episode of Angkorian history, at least the vision. There is a book in French which hasn't been published yet, but will be published certainly very soon from Mr. Jean-Edmond Dabili, Images d'Angkor. Those pictures were rediscovered by the researcher Ken Davis, who decided to publish a big article about that. Here we have, I would say, it's certainly one of the best way to illustrate rapidly this Angkor vision. The early beginning. Well, according to Kate Davis, Fieve's paintings were extraordinary because he worked with two of the world's foremost Khmer scholars, Bernard-Philippe Grolier and Georges Sedès. Bernard-Philippe Grolier was precisely Georges Grolier's son, the man who designed the National Museum of Cambodia, to achieve the highest degree of visual and historical accuracy possible. We have to add that he used as well what the Chinese traveler Chou Tak-wan wrote in the 13th century, as Chou Tak-wan visited Cambodia in 1296-97 and back to China. It took 15 years to write his book about Cambodia, sorry. What is interesting about that, you see this picture, for instance, about the beginning of Angkor. You have the future king, Jayavarman II, let's say the second, who was held captive in Java. For how long? Maybe a few years, we don't know exactly. According to the standard view, let's say, he was held captive in Java. He could escape and arrive in Cambodia, where he was sanctified as the first Devaraja. Devaraja, God, king, God, officially. And at the same time, there was a ceremony performed by a Brahman priest who, officially again, it is kind of official, skilled in the science of magic science, perform a ceremony to protect Cambodia from Java. Thus, Java, Cambodia, would not have to pay allegiance to Java anymore. This is the early beginnings you can find, I would say, in Sedès and in many other authors over time. Soon came, and we can see, for instance, Yasovarman I right here. It's a beautiful painting. On the top of his temple, Yasodarapura, known as Phnom Bakain in the early 12th century, there was a strengthening of the royal power. The pictures of Maurice Fievé represents as well a nation of builder with the building of Angkor Wat in the 12th century, and the king holding audience. That was directly inspired by Chou Tak-wan writings. Interestingly enough, well, we do not need to see builders, kings, and things like that, but thanks to Maurice Fievé, we could penetrate into the intimacy of Angkor with a princess in the royal palace, kind of beautiful paintings as well, or in the royal bath right here. You see a perfect world full of colors, which reminds me of a French painting of the French Protectorate you can find in the Center for Development of Cambodia, which was the former stronghold of the French Protectorate at the Residence. Unfortunately, just like in every beautiful dreams, there was a tragedy. The tragedy occurred in 1177, the chaos, when the Cham defeated the Khmer on the Tonle Sap and was a prelude to the dramatic fall of Angkor. We have the opportunity to talk about that as well a lot. And of course, after the fall, after the chaos, came the restoration. A prince who was going to reign under the name of Jayavarman VII came to the throne in 1181. Successful military campaigns against the Cham. The kingdom of Champa became a vassal of the Khmer Empire in 1203. This is the standard view. I have to add that some people still agree with that. Of course, you can find a similar vision with the famous Colonial exhibition. Angkor in Marseille in 1922, a beautiful world of stone, not subject to change. In Paris in 1941 and 31, the numbers of visitors was absolutely incredible at that time. And at the same time, I would say Angkorianism was born. The idea behind that was simple. You were once great. Evidence those beautiful temple your civilization gave birth to. Now, unfortunately, after greatness came decadence. Thanks to the French Protectorate, you will be helped to recover your past greatness. That was absolutely remarkable. So, you know, decadence and greatness. I have to add that things were not exactly like that. Okay? But by the way, I don't want to criticize Maurice Fievé at all. I won't be misunderstood. The paintings are absolutely beautiful. And if you find, for instance, the article of Robert Moore with all those beautiful paintings, that will be a fantastic present for your mother-in-law, for instance. But the standard view was well expressed in that book, which is a real Bible, Sodèche, les États hindouisés d'Indochine et d'Indonésie, which was published several times without substantial change and was translated 2 times into English in the United States of Southeast Asia. And it was used and reused. Even when you read other books published, of course, before Vickery, like, for instance, Mikheyev, Historiography. It's not a translation. It is not a translation from Sodèche, obviously, but you find exactly the same framework. The one we have seen about, the one Fievé's painting were about. And on the other side, okay, in Khmer, okay, Pravata Kampuchea, by Khmer, Pravata Khmer. I don't know what say Pravata Kampuchea, Pravata Khmer. It was published during the Khmer Republic, 1970, 1975, and it was a kind of nationalistic book. But Trengier did not, okay, translate his text from Sodèche, but you can find almost, I would say, the same thing and the same ideas. What to say about that? Michael Vickery's contribution to the history of Angkor. We have an idea now, a very, I would say, simple idea of what that standard view was. What did Michael Vickery write about it? First, a biographical sketch, okay? Michael Vickery defended his PhD thesis in 1977 in Yale University, and of course, about post-Angkorian Khmer, the Royal Chronicles. There are many controversies about that, and this book, I hope, with Mr. de Pernon here, that we one day, okay, would contemplate a publication. Okay, which would be something absolutely remarkable, as it is one of the very few serious documents about that period. Michael Vickery offered many books. About all those books, 2 absolutely essential about Cambodia. One, of course, we already talked about it, Society, Economics and Politics in Pre-Angkor Cambodia. This is really, okay, a revolutionary book. It's not possible to evoke Pre-Angkor Cambodian before and after this book in the same way. On the other side, Cambodia 1975-1982. This book has been strongly criticized, but I would like to notice that Michael Vickery, according to what many authors do today, decided to analyze the politics of democratic Kampuchea, the Khmer Rouge regime, according to different places with testimonies. Okay? It means that there was not a unified policy, but in the same time, there was a different way of approaching politics in one place or the other. This was absolutely a remarkable book as well. Michael Vickery wrote and published more than 100 articles, mainly about Cambodian history and politics, a lot about Champa, Champa revisited, for instance, and Siam as well. And, of course, okay, he left a manuscript about Angkor history, unpublished history of Angkor. And I have to tell you that the unpublished history of Angkor became a history and historiography of Angkor. Totally different. Why historiography? We are going to talk about it right now. The early beginning. The early beginning is seen by Michael Vickery. Returning from Java, had been captive, the prince, the future Jayavarman II was sanctified, and so on and so on. We'll talk about that. A 6 centuries epic was born. The traditional view is the following one. There are 7 versions. Sodèche offered 1, Jacques 5, and Mikheyev, Russian, 1. What are those versions about? We accepted the story of Angkor in Cambodia as began with a prince, the future Jayavarman II, who may have been captured when Javanese attacked Cambodia. He returned in 800 or 802 from Java to Indrapura. We don't know exactly where Indrapura was, and began his conquest of Cambodia. Why not? 2. Jayavarman II went to Mahendraparvata, Mount Mahendra, which is certainly the Kool-Aid mountain, and had some ceremonies performed. One ceremony was to keep Kambuya Desha independent from Java. The other ceremonies were to establish some kind of god, in Sanskrit, the Devaraja. What does this mean? Michael Vickery analyzes. It's totally different. One, the date 802. But the Shaka era, if you want to translate the Shaka era into our calendar, you have to wait 78, sometimes 79 years. Shaka era 724, AD 802, is found these 6 Sanskrit inscriptions, not Khmer. Interestingly enough, when you look at the time those inscriptions were carved, you discover immediately that one was of the time of Jayavarman V after 968, the other one after 1002, and the other one in 1052, in fact. So 1 century, 2 centuries, 2 centuries and a half after the event had taken place. Already suspect. We did the same thing in Europe, by the way. When you look at the way Nero, the Emperor Nero, was analyzed, and all the consideration of Nero came from historians who wrote 2 centuries after Nero had passed away. The interesting thing is that, let's go on, so the date 802 is a bit strange. According to Michael Vickery, all the inscription and a few others confirm that Jayavarman II was reigning in 802. And we have an idea about that. I won't develop it, but it shows that it was reigning. Java, the myth of Java. In the 8th century, neither Java nor Sumatra, which is Srivijaya, was strong enough to dominate Cambodia and especially kidnap a member of a royal family, such as Prince Jayavarman, for instance. In Java, the center of culture and royalty was inside the island. There were no, I would say, kingdom outside. Of course, there were some harbors. We know them thanks to Chinese maps, but it's very difficult even today to identify them, when, where, exactly. Java was not a strong power. And for Srivijaya, Sumatra, they were much more interested in developing trade with China than attacking Cambodia. So obviously, it's very unlikely that the Javanese could kidnap the future Jayavarman VII. Michael Vickery analyzes the Devaraja. Devaraja is very interesting. We use the K235 inscription. We'll talk about this inscription of Stokatom. Stokatom was discovered in a little temple 3 kilometers in Thailand now from the Khmer border. It was set up in the reign of King Jayavarman II in 1052, in both Sanskrit and Old Khmer. We have very few bilingual inscriptions. This one was not exactly bilingual, Sanskrit being the language of the god, and Khmer being the language of the poor people we are, human. But on the other side, some inscription can use the 2 languages. The interesting thing is that most historians, I would say, gave their attention to the Sanskrit part of Stokatom. Of course, Sanskrit, Samskritam, the sacrament, is certainly much more beautiful than a spoken language like Khmer. And of course, immediately, Devaraja, a Sanskrit word, Deva, God, Raja, king, a god king of a king of gods. And according to them, it was a type of a Shiva Linga representing the king. And each king, after Jayavarman, built a temple in the center of his city for the Devaraja, according to Georges Sedès. Unfortunately, Devaraja is quoted only in one inscription, the Stokatom, K235. But if we look at the Khmer version, we find this, Kamraten Jagat Raja Uraja, which is absolutely without connection to Shiva. It means the Lord of the world belonging to the king or the kingdom. What does this mean? It means something very simple. It is a local god. It is a local god, simply a Khmer local god. And this was found in other inscriptions like K844 and 843 and so on. Contrary to Devaraja, which is only found in Stokatom inscription. Interestingly enough, Devaraja, in spite of a Sanskrit name, it's not a god, it's not an Indian god. It has nothing to do with India. It does not exist in India. It means simply that the inscription and the people who carved the inscription thought it in Khmer and translated it into Sanskrit. The first language was not Sanskrit, it was Khmer. Had the first historian been better inspired, they would have considered the Khmer version, but local god, and then the Sanskrit version. They did exactly the contrary. This is one of Michael Vickery's fundamental findings about it. Let's go a bit further. This is what it means. Why Java? Now, I would say most historians would never believe that. But most. I was offered Mr. Jeff Périgord, a photographer, I don't know where he is, he's right there, had the kindness to buy a book, to purchase a book for me in Wat Phu, near Wat Phu. The book is a very interesting one. And what do I read in that? Unfortunately, I can give the illusion that I have an eagle sight, but it's not the case. I read, for instance, in the year 790, a Khmer princess in French, who became soon afterwards King Jayavarman II, after having lived a long time prisoner of the Java king, came to his homeland, Cambodia, and proclaimed himself Devaraja, and so on. You know, this is what I would call is simply that those are the wandering errors, you know. It's easy to say when an error was born, but you can't refrain an error from going here and there. And I've seen many books with that story, Java and Java. So, why Java? Why Java? Interestingly enough, if you read Sedes, you know, Georges Sedes, the great priest of Cambodian history, one of the first, you will read that Jayavarman's return from Java, perhaps motivated by the weakening of the Shailendra, we talk about that on the island, took place around 800. For we have abundant evidence that the effective beginning of the reign was 802. It's a joke. First, it's totally ridiculous. If Jayavarman, the prince who was going to be Jayavarman, arrived in 800, I don't see, you know, coming from Java, hello, I'm back now, I'm going to reign. Come on. It's totally impossible. In 2 years, you can't conquer the power and impose yourself as a king. This doesn't work. It's totally illogical. Then we have Claude Jacques. After coming from Java, but certainly not the island of Java itself. This is the third version. The first version, he was coming from Java. The second version, he was not coming from Java. The third version, he was coming from Java, but Java was not exactly Java. I would say it's a bit like the French writer Alphonse Sallet, who wrote Shakespeare plays were never written by Shakespeare, but by someone who lived in the same time, who wrote exactly the same play, and whose name was Shakespeare. It's a bit like that. Interestingly enough, when you consider Sedes made things clear. He said, I do not understand what people strengthen not to consider that Java is Java, and the Isle of Java. There is another interpretation about Java, like in modern Khmer, for instance, when you talk about the periphery of a space. You can say Khmer Kanchvir, because Chvir is the name of Java. Kanchvir. That would be maybe a meaning about that in far away and so on and so on. But it's certainly not the case here, and Sedes made it clear that Java was Java. Let's go on. After the third version, Jacques published a fourth one, and the fifth one, definitely, Java was Java. Jayavarman came from Java, where he and his family had apparently been held prisoner for some time. Well, we could say to Mr. Claude Jacques, okay, who is a great Sanskritist and things like that, but was not very happy with that episode. Sedes' final conclusion is interesting. Sedes finally considered that all that may well be myth and not history. He did that at the end of his life and published a few lines about that where he implicitly renounced his theory. So why Java? Well, we have the name of Shailendra. Shailendra, Shaila mountain, Indra king. Mountain, the king of mountain king. Interestingly enough, You remember Funan and Chandla? It's the reason why I talk about it. Funan and Chandla. Funan was considered from, but was a Chinese word, 2 characters, Fu and Nan. It was supposed to be derived from the Khmer Vnum or Pnum. In reality, it's not the case. It's apparently not the case for various reasons, but doesn't matter. And so there was a big theory which was built by Finot. Finot was a remarkable epigraphist, one of the fathers of Cham epigraphy and so on, who wrote remarkable things. But Finot considered that there was a Gurung Vnam, the mountain king, and developed a theory after the fall of Funan, after Chenla had conquered Funan, the royal family escaped and went to Java. So these people, in order to take revenge, years and years, centuries after, they kidnap a member of the royal family. On the other side, Vickery's version is highly interesting. He shows very well that in reality, it's not Shailendra, it's Selendra. Dapunta is a chief, Selendra. And in order to make things better, the word Selendra, which is a Japanese word, was rewritten as Shailendra, the king of the mountains, in order to have something, I would say, more beautiful, a bit like, well, you can, this is the reason why. So why Java? With Vickery, we finally have an answer. Deconstruction is a key word for Vickery. Michael Vickery, historiography, absence of script, of course, prehistory. But there is something more. Sanskrit and Chinese documents at the beginning of the Christian era is not history, it's proto-history. First, the Sanskrit inscriptions are, to borrow the title of the book of Sheldon Pollock. Sheldon Pollock is a great Sanskritist, the language of God in the world of man. Sanskrit was really considered the language of God. By reading a Sanskrit inscription, you will learn a lot about Shiva, Vishnu, Ganesha, but Sanskrit language is not interested in people like you and me. That's proto-history. And the Chinese documents, well, the Chinese documents are very strange most of the time. If you do not have a coherent archaeological place set to, I would say, analyze them, most of the time they are documents which are not very interested in geography. They will not tell you where the capital was. They describe a place without entering into the details, and so on and so on. We do not know exactly what they refer to. This is a big problem. For instance, if you take a Sanskrit inscription, the Volcain inscription, this is the first Sanskrit written inscription found in what is now Nha Trang in Vietnam. It is from the 3rd century BC. If you analyze this inscription, which was certainly one inscription people published a lot, and a lot Finot published about it. He tried to see the man who, I would say, erected it was Buddhist or not. The final word came to Filiosa, who, as usual, produced a very interesting article on Filiosa, in which he said, well, first, the first line are taken from the Mahabharata. And it is, in fact, Sri Nara, a Tamil god from southern India, of course we use Sanskrit, to which it is dedicated. But with an inscription like that, we learn nothing. We learn nothing about the land where it was erected or something like that. We have no idea. Things were going to change with the first stela in Khmer language. And this one, Angkor, I have to thank Mrs. Stray Mom, who rubbed it out here and allowed me a few years ago, I don't know if she remembers, to take a photograph of it. This is the K600, the inscription of Angkor. This is in Khmer. And then we learn about history. We learn, thanks to this inscription, that there was offered, bestowed to a temple and to the Lord of the Holy Tree, singers, dancers, female singers, female dancers, female players of instruments like lao, kanyang, and so on and so on. Then you had rice fields, several rice fields with a location of a rice field which is offered to the sanctuary. You had in the same time orchard, and so on and so on and so on. In short, those Khmer language inscriptions are described by Vickery. They are about control and organization of land, people and animals related to agriculture. They do not show any interest in the sea or long-distance trade. They contain names of God, goddesses, kings, official and ordinary people. In short, history. To know history, forget the Sanskrit inscription, use the Khmer ones. There, it's about people like us. But we talked a lot about Sudes. We have to say one word about epigraphy. Epigraphy, the science of inscription, not paleography. And paleography is the shape of the letters, if my memories are good. Georges Sudes is best known for the Indianized state of Southeast Asia. Georges Sudes was the translator of Old Khmer and Sanskrit inscription of Cambodia, especially in his 8-volume Inscription of Cambodia. It's an impressive work containing translation of over 1,000 inscriptions, okay, from pre-Angkor. Pre-Angkor is for, I would say, the first inscription, 7th century, till the end of Angkor era. It's absolutely impressive. What does this mean? If we compare Sudes with Vickery and the way they wrote, Sudes was very confident in Chinese documents. He used them a lot. For instance, the story of Chen La fighting and the conquest of Funan by Chen La was in Chinese history. Vickery was very different. Sudes had a vision of Angkor history which neglected the social fabric, social classes and so on and so on. Vickery, on the contrary, had a strong interest in Angkor social fabrics. Sudes, and that's, I would say, the incredible paradox. Although Sudes was the translator of all those Khmer inscriptions, he never used them, or he didn't really use them to write, okay, Cambodian history. Vickery, on the contrary, displayed a constant use of Khmer inscription. Sudes, we talk about Sdok Katom inscription with the Devaraja and so on. Sudes has no historiographic treatment of the epigraphic material. For instance, he used Sdok Katom, we have talked about this one already, to reconstruct an event. It's written in Sdok Katom that Jayavarman Papa 802, Devaraja, and so on. It's good. Let's take it. Vickery, on the contrary, we must not assume what a king of Angkor and Sdok Katom was written 2.5 centuries after those events took place. We must not assume what the king of Angkor several years later thought about the past is a better interpretation. Contemporary evidence from the place being studied must always be preferred to evidence from some other time or place. You see, there are two very different historiographic conceptions. Let's have a look on that famous Sdok Katom inscription. The Sdok Katom inscription was from 10,052 during the reign of King Jayavarman II in Khmer and in Sanskrit. You have here the photograph of Sdok Katom. This part here is in Sanskrit, the part here is in Khmer. There are two others, two other faces, Sanskrit and Khmer. There is a huge literature about Sdok Katom. One of the best books I found about it was this one. It was a master degree of Mrs. Jack and Free Chani. And there is a good linguistic analysis in both Khmer and Sanskrit. The Sdok Katom inscription in the previous century, that is in the 9th and the early 10th century, I would say most of the inscriptions were directly ordered by the king or members of a royal family close to the king. There was not a state bureaucracy, properly speaking. The change occurred in the 10th, 11th century. There was an increasing number of inscriptions in Khmer set up by non-royal officials, sometimes only middle-rank officials. This is something extremely important. Why? Sdok Katom This inscription, this big inscription, it's a considerable size, well, was about the control and the development of land given to the family by the kings, generally here it's Jayavarman II, and the official possession which the family held from one generation to the next. It simply says, we were given that land by the king, our family was given the land by the King Jayavarman II, and at the same time we had titles corresponding to that. Interestingly, there are 17 inscriptions of that time, 17, which is absolutely enormous, like Stockatom, most of them written in the time of Jayavarman V, Jayavarman I, and Devaraja II. Interestingly enough, those inscriptions talk about rank and possession since Jayavarman II. Conflicts with more than one family claiming the same possession. You see, already we have what could be called families or big families. I would call them clans. Interestingly enough, this inscription allowed Michael Vickery to study the titles in Khmer society. Michael Vickery paid an homage to Aymonier. Aymonier, who was certainly the first one before Vickery to get involved into the study of titles. Etienne Aymonier was the French representative. We call that later on the head of a protectorate, but that was a French representative in 1879, 1881. At the same time, he authored 3 books about Cambodia, which were published from 1900 to 1904. And what's interesting about Aymonier is that he was the first one to do a real archaeological work, not only in what was then the Protectorate of Cambodia, but Cochin China, South Vietnam, Thailand, and Laos as well. I would like, frankly, to say a word about Aymonier, like that for one very simple reason. Aymonier was not only neglected, but in the same time he was very much used without being very much quoted, and he was one certainly of the best historians. He was not a historian originally, he was an explorer, he was an epigraphist because he worked on Cham language, on Old Khmer language, and he was as well, I would say, well, let's call him a linguist. Michael Vickery, this is his book about le Cambodge, le groupe d'Angkor, and l'histoire. But his books are really excellent. Michael Vickery did exactly the same and developed. He could show that in pre-Angkor Cambodia, there were titles like Poing, and then Mratang, which appeared in the first inscription. Poing was precisely in the Funan kingdom. Mratang, which was going to have a longer life in the Chenla. The Poing, for instance, was a title for the manager of the local land without owning the land, but he was managing them. In the same time, his family and his son could not inherit from his title, which was a bit different from Bretagne, where it was possible to have a direct, from father to son, inheritance. All these titles disappeared in the 18th century, one after the other. These titles I found only in Khmer inscription, not in Sanskrit inscription. Traditional theory, a primitive, underdeveloped Khmer society developed under the influence of India. Michael Vickery, no. The prehistoric Khmer society was already highly stratified, as we could discover it in the Khmer inscription, not in the Sanskrit inscription, which totally ignore the title. This is for pre-Angkor society. People talk about caste. No, they were not caste. Definitely not caste. Families, clanic structure, I don't think we can talk about caste. Now, the new titles at Angkor. Michael Vickery, I would say, performed an essential analysis of the social fabric of ancient Cambodia, as revealed by statement of titles in the inscription in Old Khmer and not in Sanskrit. Vap and Loing were two major divisions of the free population. This title first appeared in the Epigraphy during the reign of Jayavarman I. You see, 889, 910, there is a problem with the origin of the new titles. Were they from the Angkor region, or Was it an import from southeast Cambodia to Angkor? Because if you consider, I didn't talk about that for a question of time, but if you consider the way Vickery in his book analyzed what happened in the 8th century, there is a move from Jayavarman II from the southeast, his origin, to Angkor region, a slow conquest of power which is revealed by epigraphic tradition. Another one, Lon, Vap, and Teng for women were middle to rather higher rank, sometimes close relative to royalty. Interestingly enough, you see the details of an inscription K335 describing the position of many Vap suggest that the corpse of Vap may have been in rivalry with the corpse of Lon for power. What does this mean? In the traditional view, we were used to a motionless world, a stone world, almost perfect, and any disturbance could only come from outside, like the conquest of the Cham in 1177. No, absolutely no. In reality, history existed in that part and that time of Cambodia. You had already conflicts. You shouldn't think about that Cambodian society as a kind of monolithic set. It's not really the case. Now, there is something interesting. We have here all the kings. And it's highly interesting to have, I would say, an understanding and a reading. It starts from Jayavarman II and it ends in Jayavarman VII. It's interesting to read all those king reigns with inscription. For instance, the two of them, Jayavarman II, this is the Sudes date and this is the new date. The two king, father and son, by the way. Yeah? No inscription during the reign of Jayavarman II and the third. We don't have an inscription. Only a few things in Sanskrit, but very few in Khmer. The interesting thing is that it's difficult to know for certain what titles were used at that time. But there are 5 inscriptions written, not by the king, they are Shaka, were about Jayavarman III and the third elephant hands. Jan Lorman wrote a big article about that. What does this mean? It means that the king went and organized elephant hands. He went with all his court, a big number of people. He arrived to the place, they captured an elephant. In the same time, it was a jump into the wilderness. New territory was then integrated into what is called the useful country. On the one side. On the other side, what is very important, people who were the king were given the land right there. They were given the land right there, and that tradition existed because when a king wanted to establish a new district, he set an elephant free and followed it until the elephant stopped. This place was chosen for a new settlement. This is Emonier. Interestingly, the Shaka inscriptions were not commissioned by the king, but rather a provincial official and landed elite, personal and familial entitlement. It means this belongs to me. It was given by the king at the time. Second thing, we have a very interesting thing. It is the famous Yasovarman. Yasovarman is here, right here, there. But no mention in Indravarman and Yasovarman the first Sanskrit inscription. They don't talk about titles. No Vap, no Lon. But, interestingly enough, in one Khmer inscription found at Lolei, for the first time, we have a description of the position of many Vap, and the mention that the corpse of Vap may have been in rivalry with the corpse of Lon for power. Already a rivalry. Very interesting. On the other side, we learn that the mother of Rajendra Varman, Mahendra Devi, and the family of the mother were Vap. On the other side, we have something about, when you look at Rajendra Varman, it was the elder half-brother of 7, and with 7, this one, Jayavarman IV. Jayavarman IV has been considered by Sudes and many French historians as a usurper, and someone would say a bit strange, because he's the one who decided to settle his capital 80 kilometers from what is now Siem Reap, Koke. You have visited it, maybe some of you have. The biggest pyramid ever built, the biggest statues, everything is big. Only one thing is not big, the time it lasted, less than 20 years. This was short. In the same time, we can appreciate for that the fact a king is not the son of a preceding king, most of people believed before that, as they applied the rule of primogeniture. Primogeniture, I mean that the son, the elder son of the king, should be the king after the death of the father. In reality, it is not the way it worked in the Khmer royalty. There were other rules. Michael Vickery wrote a lot about those. Jayavarman I, this is really very interesting. Jayavarman I came to power after what is called the civil war. A civil war, and he established his own little dynasty, which had three kings, himself and after him his two sons. It's very interesting because Jayavarman I, nearly all the inscriptions of his reign are non-royal, and most of them deal with land claims and litigation. You have inscription of K 1238. The revolutionary changes were highly beneficial to the loin. Michael Vickery asked the question, was Jayavarman first a loin? Which is quite possible, by the way. On the other side, one key feature of Jayavarman's reign was the oath inscription. There were, in his royal palace, he's the one who rebuilt a part from the palace of Pre-Angkorian. You have civil servants' oaths carved there. It is the first time that a king trying to secure his own administration. On the other side, there is a destruction of some great families. Jayavarman had more concentrated power than the king who preceded him. If you take, for instance, one of the key sculptures, this one, it was discovered in the Mebon. The monument of Jayavarman I are the Mebon, of course, the Bapuan, and Kebaspian as well. Interestingly enough, this is the famous Vishnu lying on the Ananta snake. Very interesting story, as it is linked to the cosmic time of Hinduism, which is based on Chatur Yuga. A Chatur Yuga, the four ages, with Krita Yuga, with Kali Yuga, and so on, is supposed to last 12,000 divine years. I don't know how many millions of solar years are our own years. The interesting thing is that 1,000 Chatur Yuga, 1,000, 12,000 years, is considered as Brahma's day. At the end of the Brahma's day, the snake Shesha, with fire from his mouth, was going to destroy the three worlds, the earth, the sky, the air, and so on. And just afterwards, there was an ocean which was going to engulf everything. It's precisely the time when Brahma's night begins. The god Vishnu is lying on the snake Ananta. Ananta means infinity in Sanskrit, and is meditating the new world to come. In the morning, his wife, Lakshmi, is massaging the god's feet. Right at that time, there is a stem of lotus, which appears from the god's navel, and inside the flower, Brahma with four heads. Again and again, a new world, a new universe. What is very interesting about that is that we shouldn't consider that abstractly. Khmer structure, Khmer culture is fundamentally political. When we look at something like that, we have to take into account the following facts. If you have so many motifs like that, and Mrs. Benisti wrote something very interesting about that, it is simply because in Jayavarman, Udayvarman, and Harshavarman mind, they were authoring a new world, a new civilization. They were building something entirely new. This is one interpretation we can derive from Vickery. Again, Arfan, we come to Jayavarman. This is, a new dynasty. It starts from Jayavarman I with the builder of Angkor Wat. The builder of Angkor Wat, one of the greatest kings. We do not have inscription of his time. We do not even have an inscription with the date of Angkor Wat. We say 12th century, but who knows? This is a big problem. The reign of Jayavarman VII, and I will conclude on this one, is by far the most celebrated Cambodian king. You can see when you visit Angkor and even Thailand today, the impressive, a considerable number of impressive construction, almost everywhere, hospitals, temples. But it's an enigmatic reign. We have only a few inscriptions in Sanskrit about his time. We do not have real Khmer inscription. For instance, the Cham invasion of Angkor, which is one of the founding events of Cambodian history, Cambodian Angkor history. According to Sudesh in the Indian state, Jayavarman II, attacked Champa with some short-term success. In 1170, Cham forces and the Jayavarman IV invaded the Khmer Empire over land with inconclusive results. In 1177, his troops launched a surprise attack against the Khmer capital from warship, and so on and so on. They floated the Mekong River to the Great Lake, torn this up, and killed the Khmer Tribunal Jayavarman. The Khmer Empire was in the verge of collapse. Jayavarman VII from the north coalesced an army to battle the invader. His army won a series of unprecedented victories over Cham, and by 1181, after winning a decisive naval battle, Jayavarman had rescued the empire and expelled the Cham. Now, where and what is that based on? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Chinese history. Okay, sometimes it's really ridiculous. For instance, when you read those Chinese chronicles, a part of it are interesting, but when you read that, for instance, Cham forces and Jayavarman, the fourth, invaded the Khmer Empire. Of course, it is supposed, and it has been written, that there were, before the invasion, there were negotiations between the Cham and the Chinese over horses. But we know very well that the Cham had horses before that. They didn't need the Chinese to provide them with horses. But you would consider, when you read something like that you have the impression of a modern national war, a Khmer nation against the Cham. It is totally untrue. It is totally untrue. And why do we know that it is untrue? Vickery, and not only him, but other authors. First, there is a lack of evidence. Well, in spite of the name Champa, the kingdom, there was no kingdom of Champa. Champa, we know it from the writings of Podharma, was a confederation of kingdoms. You had Indrapura, Maravati, Vijaya, Panduranga, and so on, several kingdoms. And the first French researchers were very surprised to notice that, what is that? We have a list of kings which do not correspond from one to the other. Of course, this could be explained because there were several kingdoms which were considered as a part of a confederation of which the name was Champa. The second thing, there is no Khmer epigraphic material to reconstruct the strength of it. Nothing. Okay? This is clear. The details of invasion preparation come from the Chinese sources, very often unreliable. Much details about the second period, the Renaissance, is found in the inscription of Champa, and no Cham invasion of Angkor is ever mentioned. Can be clear about that. So, what the Cham inscription subject? I will sum it up what Michael Vickery wrote about it. First, the Champa inscription contribute to the standard history, so this and the others, imply that Champa, or at least the center and the south, was subordinate to Cambodia since some time before 1190. That was in the 70s, very likely. It means that not the whole of Champa Kingdom, but a part of southern Champa Kingdom, were, let's call them, Cambodian protectorates, which is highly interesting, by the way, because the war between Champa and Cambodia had lasted for almost 100 years. Okay, it began with Jayavarman VII and went on till Jayavarman VII. 2. We have, for instance, the inscription C92, 1170, Mason inscription, Champa, which was erected by the Prince Vidyananda. Very interesting inscription. It is very interesting because you see that Vidyananda supported first Jayavarman, the future Jayavarman VII, and then, as he was back in Champa, he, let's say, betrayed him in some sense, which was very interesting. In the 1170s, the future Jayavarman was in Vijaya, Champa. What was he doing there? Official, Khmer official, maybe a governor, we don't know. We know that he was in Vijaya, and this is confirmed by a Sanskrit inscription of Cambodia. I will go very quickly on this to conclude. It is not known where exactly the future Jayavarman was at the time of the conflict between Yasovarman and the Jayavarman. It means that the second was an usurper who took power from the first. Soon after Jayavarman had been killed in conflict with the Cham, the future Jayavarman II with his Cham allies, presumably with troops which he had brought from Champa, began to reconquer the country. This is a new version. It means the following fact. Michael Vickery suggests that the real conquest of Angkor, putting an end to the post-Suryavarman confusion, Suryavarman being struck from the power of his power by Tribhuvanaditya-Varman, well, that resulted into a confusion. The real conquest of Angkor was by Jayavarman and his Cham and Khmer allies, probably in the 1170s, 1177, before 1181. And the subordination of central and southern Champa to him dated from that time. Last point. In 1190, in one inscription from Mason, a rebellion was called against him in Champa, apparently in Vijaya, and not, as stated by Maspero and Sudesh, a Cham aggression which offered him an excuse to invade and conquer Champa. So, it was to tame a rebellion. What does this mean? It means that at that time, we have to consider Jayavarman VII's reign, when he was in Vijaya, there was several clans, a real clanic structure. And this is revealed in a remarkable way. Well, I conclude he effected the real conquest of Champa for over 20 years, started in 1190. It means that there was not a state against another state. There were groups in one state against some other groups in the other state. There were Cham fighting with the Khmer and Khmer fighting with the Cham at that time. And we know that very well when we look, for instance, at the K485, which was an inscription from Queen Indra Devi after the death of her sister Devaraja Devi. The two wives of Jayavarman VII, one after the other. Yasovarman was written by a servant. Jayavarman returned from Vijaya, Jayavarman VII, to help Yasovarman. But Yasovarman was overthrown and Jayavarman remained where? We don't know if it is Vijaya or Cambodia, in order to save the world. Then the Cham king, Sri Jaya Indravarman of Champa, attacked, bringing his army on chariot. So Sri Jaya Indravarman caught the usurper. The usurper was certainly the one who took the power from Yasovarman. But caught the usurper, king, and killed him. And then Jayavarman VII was victorious. Victorious against whom? Against certainly there Sri Jaya Indravarman. I don't want to go on and to go further on that, just to analyze a few photographs. The Bayon, I would say, relief were analyzed by Sudesh, but mainly by Parmentier. But here, the people represented, the rowers and the soldiers, are definitely Khmer. But look at this one. Here, we have a fight. Cham people here, the warriors are Cham, which were identified thanks to their headgears. Headgears, not thanks to Sudesh, who said that he had seen a Mukalinga in Mason, which looked like, no, but Parmentier. Parmentier did the best job. And the rowers as well, you see. And then you have the Khmer right here, interesting, with the rowers who are totally different, the Cham having advantage over the Khmer. Here, sorry, I just come back now. You see, that things here, we have the Cham warrior right now, and here another scene, okay, apparently a Cham here, which can be recognized thanks to it, and two Khmer fighting one with each other. Strange. Two Khmer fighting one with each other. Here as well we have Cham soldiers, warriors, right here. But look at the rowers. They are totally different from the preceding one. They didn't have the typical Cham headgear. But are they Khmer? Not exactly, because they've got a little bun right here, which you didn't find with the Khmer. You see, what were they? This has to be studied. I didn't find anything about that. Then you analyze that one. Here you have Cham warriors, right here. On the other side you have people right here, rowers. Well, definitely not usual Cham, as they did not have the headgear. Were they Khmer? Or maybe other Cham. There were several kingdoms. We didn't know exactly. Interesting. We go on. Here we have Cham soldiers again. That's very clear, according to their head, and rowers as well. And apparently it's detrimental to Khmer. You have Khmer, I would say, soldiers who are killed. Those are the crocodiles here. Some very interesting here. Khmer army, the Khmer army on an elephant, and so with someone looks with a strange head here. In the same time, you have dead people we have already seen on the boat with a bun right here. Strange. It's difficult to define it as a Khmer against Cham. There is much variation about it. Now look at this one. Here, it's not very clear because this part was unfinished, I suppose. But Khmer against Khmer, obviously. You don't have Cham here. A part of them are attacking, the other part is, I would say, fleeing. What Parmentier noticed. And this one, look at it. Cham or Khmer? Obviously Cham. But what are they doing? They are playing music, and so they're not fighting. It's interesting for, I would say, a relief depicting the war, fighting and things like that. You see people playing music. Interesting thing. And here, look at this one. A Khmer warriors, definitely with a bow in his hand. And here, a Cham soldier right there, definitely a Cham. And Khmer soldiers. Why? Let's go on. Here, they are not fighting. They are cooking and things like that. And the Cham here are hunting, obviously. They are hunting with bows right here. Why? So, we can see from those pictures that the interpretation, okay, as Vickery noticed, they have got to be analyzed and reanalyzed again. On the other side, I think that through this little lecture, I hope I have shown the interest of, I would say, Michael Vickery's book. Originally, and Mr. de Bernon, who is here, remembers that very well, we were given a manuscript, an unpublished manuscript of Angkor. It took 4 years to write this book out of it. We didn't change, I didn't change anything in the book, I just put many things into orders and it was long enough. All what is in the book was already in the original manuscript. I remember that Michael Vickery was writing about a missing chapter. In fact, the missing chapter was inside without any problem. Okay? And we could, I would say, it was about the titles, we could use it. I thank you for your attention.